Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main characters. The story begins on a rainy evening in downtown Seattle, where the sirens had not stopped echoing for hours. Firefighter Ethan Cole stood in the middle of the drenched street, soaked in rain and ash, his gear heavy with soot. Behind him, the burned shell of an old apartment building still hissed with smoke. He had been the last one to leave the site, refusing to rest until every victim was safe. Cameras flashed around him, voices shouted questions, but he ignored them all until one voice cut through the noise. Ethan Cole, Channel 7 News. Do you think your reckless decision endangered your team? The reporter's tone was sharp, accusing. Ethan turned. She was young, focused, her microphone steady despite the wind. Sophie Lane. He had seen her before, the fearless journalist known for exposing corruption and calling out public heroes who crossed the line. My team is alive, he said calmly. That is all that matters. Sophie did not lower her gaze. But you defied orders. Some call it heroism. Others call it ego. Ethan's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, the chief called him away. The moment was brief, but the cameras had already captured a tense stare between a firefighter and the journalist who challenged him. By morning, the image was everywhere. Headlines screamed, firefighter and reporters heated exchange sparks rumors of romance. Ethan hated the attention. Sophie hated it even more. Her editor demanded she cover Ethan's next rescue story to feed the chemistry. Meanwhile, the department's PR manager warned Ethan that the mayor's office wanted to protect the department's image at all costs. The solution was absurd but politically perfect to pretend the two were dating. It will calm the tabloids, the PR officer said. Make it look like a harmless misunderstanding between lovers instead of a scandal. Sophie was furious. You want me to fake a relationship with the man I just accused on air? Ethan crossed his arms, exhausted but oddly amused. Believe me, I am not thrilled either. The next scene unfolded inside City Hall's conference room, bright lights, cameras, and an official press conference. The mayor smiled wide as he introduced them as Seattle's most talked-about couple, united by courage and community spirit. Sophie forced a smile for the cameras, her hand shaking slightly as Ethan slipped his arm around her shoulders for the photo. The warmth of his hand startled her. For a second, she forgot it was all fake. Play along, he whispered through gritted teeth. It is only for the press. Play along, she murmured. I am not an actress. Neither am I, he said, his eyes locking with hers, steady and tired. But I guess tonight, we both have to be. That moment the click of cameras, the flashlights, the false smiles would change everything. What began as damage control would soon turn into something dangerously real, something neither of them had planned for. Because sometimes, the line between duty and desire burns hotter than any fire. The morning after the press conference, Seattle woke under a gray sky and the city buzzed with talk about the firefighter and the journalist who had turned scandal into spectacle. Sophie Lane sat in her small apartment, the television playing the replay of her own forced smile as the mayor called them a couple brought together by courage. She turned off the screen, exhaling sharply. Her phone vibrated with messages from friends, coworkers, and strangers, half congratulating, half mocking. Across town, Ethan Cole stood in front of his locker at Station 12, still in partial uniform. The guys from his unit whistled as they passed. Hey, Romeo, got your journalist girlfriend on speed dial yet? Ethan rolled his eyes. It is not like that, he said flatly, but even he could hear the disbelief in his voice. His captain pulled him aside. The department wants you to lean into the image. The mayor says it helps the city's reputation. There is a charity gala next week. You and Mississippi Lane will attend together. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck. Chief, I fight fires. I do not do red carpets. The captain sighed. Then consider it a different kind of fire, son. That afternoon, Ethan arrived at the Channel 7 studio as arranged. Sophie was waiting by the front desk, dressed sharply in a navy blazer, her hair tied back but strands already slipping loose from stress. The moment she saw him, her expression tightened. I thought this was supposed to be a one-time stunt, she said. Apparently, our city government disagrees, Ethan replied. They want a full month of appearances. We are going to be the city's goodwill ambassadors. Sophie folded her arms. Perfect. The firefighter who hates reporters and the reporter who called him reckless. What could possibly go wrong? The sarcasm drew a faint smile from him. At least you admit you called me reckless. Because you were, she shot back, though her tone had softened. The studio manager approached, explaining that Channel 7 would document their relationship journey for a community series. Ethan nearly laughed. You mean fake dates on camera? Exactly, Sophie muttered under her breath. The next few days blurred into a routine of awkward rehearsals. They practiced smiling for interviews, answering soft questions about how they met, and pretending to finish each other's sentences. Ethan was terrible at scripted charm. Sophie was too honest to fake laughter. Yet between the retakes and sarcastic banter, something human began to appear: a shared fatigue, a strange sense of partnership against the absurdities surrounding them. One evening, after a long recording session, Sophie caught him cleaning one of the studio's extinguishers. You really cannot stop being a firefighter, can you? She teased. Ethan shrugged. When you have seen what fire does, you do not ignore safety. She watched him quietly for a moment, noticing how his hand so steady under pressure trembled slightly when at rest. You almost died in that apartment fire, did you not? She asked softly. He paused, meeting her eyes. A kid almost did. I went back in. Orders said wait for backup. That is why you broke protocol, she realized. He nodded once. People think it was ego. It was not. I just could not watch someone burn. The silence stretched, heavy and honest. For the first time, Sophie saw not the arrogant firefighter from the headlines, but a man carrying guilt and duty in equal measure. You should have told that story, she said. Reporters prefer drama, he replied. Hero saves child does not sell like reckless firefighter defies command. She looked down, ashamed. Maybe I helped build that headline. Maybe, he said gently. But you are here now. Maybe you can help rewrite it. Her eyes flicked up at him, startled by the quiet sincerity. Outside, the rain had started again, tapping softly against the studio windows. Sophie smiled faintly. We might actually pull off this act, Ethan. He smiled back. Who says it is all an act? Neither of them spoke after that, but the silence said enough. It was the first spark of something real hidden beneath the ashes of their arrangement, and neither of them dared to put it out. By the end of that week, their pretend relationship had turned into a full-time job. Sophie Lane woke each morning to messages from producers, stylists, and photographers, all demanding interviews or couple appearances. She barely had time to breathe, let alone write. Ethan Cole, meanwhile, balanced firehouse duty and the absurd new role of Seattle's favorite love story. He hated every second in front of the cameras, but he tolerated it because it kept his team out of trouble and her reputation intact. One rainy Friday, the PR officer called them into City Hall. We need to make it look more official, the woman said. A written statement for the press, something symbolic. Perhaps a contract or engagement document. Sophie blinked. You mean like sign papers? The officer smiled. Just for optics. No legal standing, of course. Ethan let out a breath. Fine. Whatever helps end this faster. An hour later, they sat across from each other in the mayor's private office, pens in hand. The air smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. Sophie stared at the line where her name was supposed to go. "This feels wrong," she murmured. Ethan signed first, his handwriting bold and quick. "It is a performance," he said. "We are actors playing the parts they gave us." She hesitated, then signed, the pen trembling slightly. "You really do not care what people think of you, do you?" she asked. He met her gaze. "I care what is true. The rest is noise." That simple line stuck with her for the rest of the day. That evening, she joined him at the charity gala. The event was glamorous soft jazz, polished glass, and politicians pretending to care. Sophie wore a red gown borrowed from the network wardrobe department. Ethan, in a dark suit, looked impossibly uncomfortable but stunning nonetheless. The cameras followed their every move. When the host introduced them as Seattle's most inspiring couple, Sophie forced a smile and whispered under her breath, "We are walking headlines." Ethan leaned closer, his voice low. "Then let us give them something worth writing." When the first dance began, he offered his hand. "Dance with me," he said. "It will sell the story." "You dance?" she asked. "Badly," he replied. She laughed despite herself and let him guide her onto the floor. They moved slowly under the soft light, both stiff at first. But as the crowd's chatter blurred into background music, something shifted. He looked at her differently, no cameras, no audience, just two people pretending until it stopped feeling like pretend. "You are not terrible," she said quietly. "You are just distracted." "Maybe," he said, his voice low. "Maybe it is the company." Her heart skipped before she could stop it. Then the flash of a camera snapped her back to reality. The reporter from another station had caught the moment, whispering to her cameraman, "That was not acting." Later, outside on the terrace, Sophie stood alone, breathing in the cool night air. The city stretched below, sparkling against the black sky. Ethan joined her, loosening his tie. "You did well tonight," he said softly. "You almost looked like you were enjoying yourself." She smiled faintly. "You almost looked like you were not miserable." They both laughed quietly. Then she asked, "What happens when this contract ends, Ethan?" He looked out over the skyline. "Then we go back to being who we were before." "And who is that?" "A man who runs toward fire," he said, "and a woman who runs toward the truth." She studied him in silence, the wind brushing her hair. "Maybe we are not so different," she said. "Maybe not," he replied. A long pause followed, filled only by the hum of the city and the faint echo of music from inside. Then he turned to her, eyes serious. "Sophie, what if we stop letting everyone else write this story?" She blinked. "You mean the fake part?" "I mean all of it," he said. "Maybe it is time we decide what is real." She could not find words. For the first time since this madness began, the thought of ending it felt like the last thing she wanted, and somewhere deep down, she realized that the contract might be fake, but the feelings no longer were. By the following week, Ethan and Sophie's faces were everywhere: magazine covers, morning shows, and social media headlines labeling them Seattle's perfect love story. It should have been good publicity, but neither of them felt at ease. The fake romance was no longer just a stunt, it had become a spotlight neither could escape. Every move they made was analyzed, every smile dissected. When Sophie walked into the firehouse one afternoon to film another segment, the crew stopped joking and stared, their teasing replaced by an awkward kind of respect. Ethan looked up from the engine bay, wiping grease from his hands. "You did not have to come all the way here," he said. "The mayor wants footage of your daily routine," she replied. "Apparently, authenticity sells." He smirked. "So now we are selling authenticity?" "We are selling a lie," she corrected, lifting her camera. "But maybe we can make it a meaningful one." They spent the day side by side, visiting call sites, meeting families who had been saved by the department. Sophie watched how Ethan spoke to the survivors, quiet and patient, his eyes soft when the cameras were off. Later, in the truck on the drive back, she asked, do you ever stop to think about what all this costs you? He glanced at her, puzzled. What do you mean? Every time you rush into a fire, you give a piece of yourself away. The city loves you, but they do not see that. He was silent for a moment. It costs something, yes. But it gives back too. Every life we save feels like a reason to stay human. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. She looked at him differently then, not as a story, but as someone real. That night, she reviewed the day's footage alone in her apartment. There was one shot she had not meant to capture: Ethan laughing with a little boy he had rescued months earlier, the boy clutching his firefighter helmet like a crown. There was warmth in his eyes that her camera could not fake. Sophie pressed pause, staring at the frozen frame, and whispered, "You are not who I thought you were." The next morning, she found an envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a short note written in Ethan's handwriting. "Dinner tonight. No cameras. Just us." She hesitated before smiling. That evening, they met at a small diner near the waterfront. The air smelled of salt and coffee, the neon sign flickering in the drizzle. For once, there were no microphones, no flashing lights, just two people trying to figure out what they were without the script. Ethan reached across the table, his voice soft. "You know, I used to think the hardest thing was running into a burning building. Turns out, it is learning to trust someone." Sophie smiled faintly. "Trust is not my strongest skill either." "Maybe we can practice," he said. "Together." She held his gaze, and for a long moment, neither spoke. Then she whispered, "Is this still part of the act?" He shook his head slowly. "Not anymore." The silence between them was filled with something unspoken and undeniable. Outside, the rain turned into mist, blurring the city lights beyond the window. It was the kind of night that felt like a beginning, even though they both knew it was supposed to be the end. Hours later, as Sophie walked home, her phone buzzed with a message from her editor: "Emergency story. Confidential meeting. Call me first thing in the morning." The pit in her stomach told her that whatever came next would test everything: her job, her ethics, and the fragile truth she and Ethan had just begun to build. She looked back once at the diner's glowing windows, still seeing his silhouette through the glass. For the first time since this fake love began, Sophie Lane realized she was terrified of losing something real. The next morning, Sophie woke before sunrise, her thoughts tangled between the warmth of last night and the sharp weight of her editor's message. She dressed quickly, grabbed her camera bag, and headed to the Channel 7 office. Her editor, Marlene, was already waiting with a folder in hand. "Sophie, I need you to listen before you react," she began. A source came forward with something about Ethan Cole. "Internal reports say he defied direct orders during the Eastlake fire. If that story goes public, it could cost him his job." Sophie's chest tightened. "You want me to write it?" "You are the only one close enough to confirm," Marlene said, lowering her voice. "We have to publish by Monday. It will be big." Sophie looked down at the folder. Inside were official memos, disciplinary notes, and witness statements. She felt sick. "You mean you want me to expose him?" she said quietly. "We expose the truth," Marlene corrected. "You know that, Sophie." She left the office with the folder pressed against her chest like it might burn her fingers. Outside, the city moved as if nothing had changed, but for Sophie, everything had. That evening, she met Ethan at the firehouse. He was sitting on the back of the truck, still in his uniform, the golden light from the setting sun casting long shadows across his face. "Rough day?" he asked when he saw her expression. "You could say that," she said softly. He gestured for her to sit beside him. "I know that look. Something is eating at you." She hesitated. "Ethan, if there was something in your past, something the department might have buried, would you tell me?" He turned his head slowly. "Why?" "Because someone else will," she said. "A story is about to break." Ethan sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. I figured this would come back someday. Yes, I disobeyed orders. I went in when they told me not to. There was a child still inside. And they punished you for that? They gave me a warning, but the brass wanted a clean image. The official record says I followed protocol. Sophie's throat ached. My editor wants me to publish it. He met her eyes. Will you? She opened her mouth but no words came. Ethan nodded slowly, reading her silence. You are a journalist. You have to do your job. It is not that simple, she said. It is when the truth is all you have, he replied, his tone steady but distant. If you tell it right. He stood, walking toward the bay doors where the trucks waited, the air thick with the smell of smoke and engine oil. Sophie watched him go, torn between her duty and her heart. That night, she sat at her desk staring at the blinking cursor on her laptop. The headline she had drafted read, Firefighter Hero or Rule Breaker. The truth about Ethan Cole. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling. She thought of his words, his steady voice, his unwavering eyes. She deleted the headline and closed the laptop. When she looked up, the framed contract photo of her and Ethan, the one from the first press conference, caught her eye. For the first time, it did not look staged. It looked like two people who believed in something beyond a lie. Hours later, her phone rang. It was Marlene. Sophie, I hope you have something for me. I am not writing it, Sophie said firmly. If you want the story, find someone else. You are making a mistake, Marlene warned. Maybe, Sophie said quietly. But it is mine to make. The next day, the story still went live, written by another reporter, twisting facts into a narrative of arrogance and recklessness. Cameras camped outside the firehouse. The city that once hailed Ethan as a hero now questioned his integrity. When Sophie arrived at the station, he was gone. The captain told her he had requested leave. He said he needed time away from the noise. Standing in the empty bay, Sophie realized what the truth had cost them both. What began as a fake relationship to save their reputations had turned into something real, and the truth she once worshipped had just set it on fire. For several days, Ethan Cole disappeared from Seattle's headlines and from Sophie's life. The city moved on, as it always did, chasing the next controversy. But Sophie could not. Every street corner reminded her of him, the firehouse, the diner, the echo of his voice saying, "Tell it right." She checked her phone more often than she cared to admit, but no messages came. The network had reassigned her to softer human interest stories, the kind they gave to reporters who had lost their edge. She went through the motions, smiling on camera, asking polite questions, but the fire in her work had gone out. Late one evening, as rain streaked the glass of her apartment window, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She hesitated, then answered. Sophie Lane, a voice said, deep and steady. Her heart leapt. Ethan? There was a long pause. Hey, he said quietly. Sorry for calling out of the blue. She gripped the phone tighter. Where are you? Not far. Just needed space. I am at the old marine warehouse near the docks. Thought I could fix up the rescue boat there. You are still working? Not officially. But I cannot sit still. It is what I know. Can I see you? She asked before she could stop herself. He hesitated again. If you want to. 20 minutes later, she was there, her car headlights cutting through the mist. The warehouse was dimly lit, the smell of salt water and oil thick in the air. Ethan stood by the boat, sleeves rolled up, hands stained with grease. When he saw her, he stopped. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Sophie broke the silence. The story they ran was not mine. You know that, right? He nodded. I know. But you still left. I had to. I was angry. Not at you, all of it. The cameras, the lies, the pretending. I needed to remember why I started doing this in the first place. She stepped closer, her shoes echoing on the concrete floor. And did you? He looked up, eyes tired but calm. Yeah, I remembered that saving lives matters more than saving face. Sophie smiled faintly. That sounds like something you would say on camera. He laughed, the sound low and real. Maybe. But this time, I mean it. She watched him in the silence that followed, the faint hum of the dock lights filling the air. Ethan, she said softly, I never should have agreed to that fake story. None of this feels right without the truth. Then tell the truth, he said simply. Not for me, for you. What truth? She whispered. That it stopped being fake a long time ago. He met her gaze, steady and unflinching. You said once that we were selling a lie. Maybe what we found underneath was worth keeping. The words hung between them like smoke. Sophie took a slow breath. If we go public now, people will think it is damage control. Then let them, Ethan said. Let them think what they want. We will know what it really is. The sound of waves outside filled the space between their words. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small metal tag from his helmet, engraved with his badge number. I was supposed to turn this in, he said. But it feels wrong to let go of it. So I am giving it to you. Maybe it will remind you that some stories do not need to be written, they just need to be lived. Sophie took it gently, the metal warm from his hand. Her eyes burned. What am I supposed to do with this? Keep it, he said. Or throw it away. Either way, you will remember. She smiled through her tears. You always find the poetic answer, do you know that? Occupational hazard, he said softly. The tension broke, replaced by a fragile quiet that felt almost peaceful. For the first time since the lie began, there were no reporters, no contracts, no cameras, just two people standing in a drafty old warehouse, surrounded by the hum of the city and the scent of the sea. And in that stillness, Sophie Lane realized that sometimes the truest stories are the ones no one ever tells. The following morning, Sophie woke to the sound of sirens in the distance. For a split second, her heart stopped. She turned on the news instinctively, and her breath caught when she saw the headline flashing across the screen: Massive warehouse fire at the Seattle docks. Her hands shook. That was where Ethan had been the night before. Without thinking, she grabbed her keys and ran. The streets were chaos when she arrived. Fire trucks lined the waterfront, smoke poured into the gray sky, and the air burned with the acrid scent of fuel. She pushed through the crowd, shouting his name, but a firefighter held her back. Ma'am, you cannot be here, he said firmly. Please, I am with Channel 7, she pleaded. There is someone inside, a firefighter named Ethan Cole. The man's eyes flickered with recognition. We know. He went in to get two dock workers trapped behind a collapsed beam. Backup is inside now. Sophie's throat tightened. She could barely breathe as she stared at the inferno. Minutes felt like hours. Then, through the haze, movement: two figures emerging, coughing, dragging a third between them. Sophie's heart leapt as she saw him, covered in soot, limping but alive. Ethan collapsed to his knees, gasping for air. Sophie broke free from the barricade and ran toward him. Ethan! He looked up at the sound of her voice. Even beneath the soot and exhaustion, his eyes lit up. You should not be here, he rasped. Neither should you, she said, her voice breaking as she knelt beside him. You said you needed to stay away from the noise. This is not what I meant. He coughed, trying to smile. Old habits die hard. The medics moved in, checking his vitals. Sophie stood beside him, refusing to leave. The news cameras were everywhere now, but she did not care. All that mattered was that he was alive. Later, as he sat on the ambulance bumper wrapped in a blanket, she sat beside him. You saved them, she said quietly. Again. It is what I do, he answered, staring at the rising smoke. And it is what you will write, she said. No, he replied gently. This one is yours. She frowned. What do you mean? He turned to her. You were here. You saw what mattered. Tell them what courage really looks like. For a long moment, Sophie said nothing. Then she nodded. I will. But this time, I am telling it for me, not for ratings. Good, he said with a faint smile. Because sometimes the truth does not need an audience. She looked at him, and the chaos around them faded until there was only the two of them, one burnt, bruised, but alive, the other finally understanding what it meant to stand by someone without hiding behind words. As the paramedics led him to the ambulance, Ethan reached out, his hand brushing hers. We are still writing our story, he whispered. Then let us make sure it ends right, she said, gripping his hand. For once, the cameras caught something real, not a headline or a scandal, but a moment that spoke louder than any story she could ever tell. 2 days later, the city was still talking about the fire at the docks. For the first time, the headlines were not twisted or cruel. They called Ethan Cole what he had always been, a hero. The photos showed him carrying one of the dock workers out of the blaze, his uniform torn, his face blackened with soot, but his eyes steady and unafraid. Sophie Lane's byline appeared beneath every article. She had written it herself, the truth in full, without spin or spectacle. A man defined not by orders, but by heart, the story read. It went viral overnight. When Sophie arrived at the hospital to check on Ethan, the nurses recognized her immediately. He is awake, one of them said kindly. But he has been asking for you. Her pulse quickened as she walked down the corridor. She found him sitting by the window, one arm bandaged, sunlight spilling across his face. He looked tired but peaceful, as if he had finally set something right. You broke another rule, she said softly, leaning against the doorframe. Ethan turned, smiling faintly. You mean saving people? Guilty as charged. She stepped closer. You scared me, you know that? You have a funny way of saying thank you, he teased. She rolled her eyes but smiled anyway. Then her expression softened. I wrote the story, she said. The real one. I read it, he replied quietly. You told it right. It was never just a story, she said, her voice low. It was us. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of machines and the faint sound of city traffic filled the silence. Then Ethan reached for the drawer beside his bed and pulled something out. It was the same metal badge tag he had given her at the warehouse, now polished clean. I thought I lost it in the fire, he said. But one of the guys found it near the boat. Sophie stared at it, her chest tightening. You kept it? I told you, it was yours, he said simply. But maybe it means more if I ask you to give it back. Give it back, she repeated, confused. He took a deep breath, his voice steady. Yeah, because I want you to wear it at the documentary premiere next week. The department and the city are hosting it. They are calling it Everyday Heroes. You will be there, right? Of course, she said. Why? He smiled. Because I plan to make a new kind of headline that night. Sophie laughed softly, shaking her head. You and your headlines. Just promise me you will be there, he said. I will, she whispered. He reached out, his hand warm against hers. Then maybe, after the lights go down, we can stop pretending completely. She looked at him for a long moment, her throat tight. Ethan, the pretending ended the day you walked back into that fire. The sunlight shifted, glinting off the tag in her palm. It was more than a piece of metal. No, it was a symbol of everything they had survived, everything they had become. She squeezed his hand gently and smiled. I will see you there, hero. He smiled back. Count on it. Outside the hospital window, the world went on, sirens in the distance, people rushing to their lives, but for Sophie and Ethan, time seemed to pause, suspended between truth and promise, where the story they had built on lies was finally becoming real. The night of the documentary premiere arrived with the kind of quiet anticipation that made every breath feel heavier. The grand hall of the Seattle Civic Center shimmered under soft golden lights, filled with firefighters in dress uniforms, journalists, city officials, and citizens whose lives had been touched by the department's courage. At the front of the room, a large screen displayed the title, Everyday Heroes. Sophie Lane stood backstage, holding the polished firefighter badge Ethan had given her. She ran her thumb across the engraved number, feeling its weight like a heartbeat. Her reflection in the mirror looked calmer than she felt. Then a familiar voice spoke behind her. "You look nervous." She turned, and there he was, Ethan Cole, in a black suit, his arm still in a light brace but his smile steady. "You clean up well," she said softly. "You too," he replied. "Ready to tell our story one last time?" She nodded. "Together this time." When the lights dimmed, the crowd quieted. The documentary began with images of the Eastlake fire, the warehouse rescue, and clips of everyday citizens thanking the firefighters who had saved them. Sophie's narration filled the room, her own voice steady and warm, telling the truth without exaggeration, without fear. As the film faded to its final frame, the audience rose in applause. The mayor took the stage to present a special commendation, calling Ethan forward. But instead of accepting it immediately, Ethan stepped up to the microphone and looked toward Sophie. "I have been called many things this year," he began, "a hero, a rule breaker, a headline. But the truth is, none of those labels matter. What matters is the people who remind you why you fight in the first place. For me, that person is right here." The crowd turned as Sophie froze where she stood, eyes wide. Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver ring he had once used as a prop for their fake engagement photos. He smiled faintly. "It started as a lie to protect our names. But somewhere along the way, it became the truest thing in my life." The room fell completely silent as he crossed the stage toward her. "Sophie Lane," he said, his voice soft but sure, "you once told me that truth is the only story worth telling. So here is mine. I love you. No cameras, no contracts, no pretending. Just me." Tears welled in her eyes as the audience erupted in gentle applause. She took his hand, her voice trembling. "You always did have a thing for dramatic timing." He laughed quietly. "Old habits. And bad ones," she said, smiling through her tears. Then, in front of the crowd that had once doubted them, Sophie leaned in and kissed him. The room filled with warmth and applause, not for the spectacle but for the sincerity. The cameras flashed, but this time neither of them cared. Later, as the night faded and the guests dispersed, they stood outside beneath the quiet city lights. Ethan slipped his arm around her shoulders. "Do you ever think about how it all began?" he asked. "A fake story," she said, "and a real ending." He smiled. "The best mistake we ever made." She leaned against him, watching the city glow. The sirens in the distance sounded softer tonight, almost like music. For the first time, their story did not need headlines, contracts, or cameras, only two hearts that had finally stopped pretending, and a love that had survived the fire.